Every summer, the same thing happens. You walk out to your garden in the morning and find the leaves shredded, the hostas, the lettuce, the seedlings you planted 2 weeks ago, eaten down to the stem overnight. You put down slug pellets, you scatter coffee grounds, you read somewhere about beer traps, and spent a Saturday evening setting them up. By the following morning, the pellets are dissolving in the rain, the coffee grounds have washed into the soil, and the damage is continuing exactly as before. The reason none of it works is not that you are doing it wrong. It is that you are fighting a symptom rather than dismantling the system that produces it. Slugs and garden pests do not simply appear in a healthy garden and begin feeding. They appear in a garden whose conditions have been allowed to favor them, and once those conditions exist, no amount of pellets or barriers applied to the surface of the problem will remove it. You are treating the outcome. The Japanese gardening tradition, refined across more than 1,000 years of small plot-intensive cultivation, treats the cause. What follows is not a list of tricks. It is a layered system, 3 distinct layers, each reducing pest pressure by a different mechanism, each reinforcing the others, that Japanese gardeners use to grow productive, largely pest-free gardens without a single synthetic chemical. Modern entomology and soil science have since confirmed why each layer works. The confirmation was not a discovery, it was a recognition of something Japanese farmers already knew. The soil. The starting point of the Japanese approach to pest control is not the pest, it is the soil, and specifically the condition of the soil's surface. Slugs are moisture-dependent animals. Their bodies are roughly 80% water, and they lose that moisture continuously through their skin as they move across dry surfaces. A slug crossing dry, open ground on a warm day is losing water it cannot replace until nightfall brings the dew. The energy cost of moving across hostile terrain is high enough that slugs make a calculation, not a conscious one, but a behavioral one, shaped by millions of years of evolution, about whether a food source is worth the crossing. Japanese kitchen garden cultivation has for centuries used a soil management practice that makes that calculation unfavorable. The practice is the application of rice bran, nuka, to the soil surface around cultivated plants. Nuka is a byproduct of rice milling that Japanese households have produced in quantity for as long as rice has been the dietary staple of the country, which is to say for well over 2,000 years. Its primary traditional uses were fermenting and preserving vegetables in the nukadoko pickling bed and conditioning soil, but its secondary effect, documented by observation across generations of kitchen gardeners, was that slugs avoided beds where it had been applied. The mechanism is straightforward. Fresh rice bran applied to the soil surface absorbs moisture and then desiccates as it dries, producing a surface layer that draws moisture away from slug bodies rather than providing it. A slug attempting to cross a nuka-treated bed is effectively moving across a desiccant. The same material that preserves vegetables by drawing moisture out through osmosis does precisely the same thing to the soft body of any gastropod that tries to cross it. The slug does not cross. It redirects. Applied in a band around the perimeter of a bed and refreshed after rain, rice bran costs almost nothing. It is available at any Asian grocery store for a few dollars a bag. It breaks down into the soil over time and adds nitrogen. It is not a poison. It is a terrain modification that makes your garden the wrong environment for the pest you are trying to exclude. The border. Terrain modification stops the easy crossing. The second layer removes the appetite before the crossing is even attempted. Japanese kitchen gardens have been planted with specific aromatic border species for centuries. The selection of those species was not arbitrary. It was the accumulated result of observation about which plants, grown at the margins of a cultivated bed, reduced pest activity within it. 2 of those plants, shiso and chrysanthemum, have since been analyzed in detail by modern plant science, and the findings confirm that Japanese gardeners selected them for the right reasons, even without the chemistry to explain why. Shiso, known in the West as perilla or Japanese basil, is one of the most common culinary herbs in Japanese cooking and one of the most consistently documented pest deterrent plants in the Japanese garden tradition. Its leaves contain perillaldehyde, a volatile aromatic compound responsible for its distinctive smell, at concentrations that repel a range of common garden insects. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry confirmed significant repellent activity in perillaldehyde against multiple pest species. Japanese gardeners planted shiso at the edges of vegetable beds, not as a dedicated pest control measure, but as a culinary herb whose secondary effect was keeping insects away from the plants it bordered. The pest deterrence was a byproduct of growing something they were going to eat anyway. Chrysanthemum, kiku in Japanese, has occupied a position of cultural significance in Japan since it arrived from China in the 8th century and was adopted as the imperial emblem. It was imported originally as medicine. Its roots were boiled into tonics, its petals added to food, its leaves steeped into drinks. What Japanese gardeners also understood understood, through observation passed across generations, was that growing chrysanthemums near vegetables reduced insect pressure on the surrounding plants. The reason, identified much later by Western science, is that chrysanthemums produce pyrethrins, natural compounds that destroy insect nervous systems on contact. Japan was the world's leading producer of pyrethrum before the Second World War. The modern synthetic pesticide industry later created an entire class of insecticides called pyrethroids, specifically to replicate what the chrysanthemum produces naturally. The flower was doing that work in Japanese gardens for 1,000 years before anyone synthesized its active compound in a laboratory. Planted as a continuous border around a vegetable bed, a combination of shiso and chrysanthemum creates a chemical margin, a zone of aromatic volatiles and natural insecticidal compounds that insects and slugs must cross to reach the plants within. Many do not cross it. Those that do encounter the rice bran barrier, waiting on the other side. The two layers work together, and establishing them requires nothing more than an afternoon's planting. The system. The first two layers reduce pest pressure from outside the garden. The third addresses the conditions inside it that allow pests to establish and multiply once they arrive. Japanese kitchen garden design, particularly as it was practiced in the intensive small plot tradition that fed Edo period urban households from courtyard gardens no larger than a few square meters, treats spacing, airflow, and moisture management as pest control tools rather than purely horticultural ones. A garden with poor airflow holds surface moisture long into the morning. A garden with plants crowded too close creates the dark, damp, ground-level environment that slugs move through most efficiently. A garden where spent plant material is left to decompose on the surface provides both the moisture and the food source that sustains a slug population through the dry periods between wet ones. The Japanese practice of tiered planting arranges plants by height so that taller plants do not shade shorter ones, and air moves through the bed at every level. The purpose is primarily to maximize light exposure in a small space. The secondary effect is a garden that dries more quickly after rain and holds lower surface humidity through the day. Lower surface humidity means a less hospitable environment for slugs at every point in their life cycle, including the egg stage, where moisture is critical for hatching. The clearing of spent material, dead leaves, finished crops, any plant matter that has completed its productive life, is treated in the Japanese garden tradition as a continuous maintenance rhythm rather than an occasional task. Done little and often throughout the growing season, it removes the habitat that sustains slug populations between feeding periods. A slug population needs somewhere to shelter through the day and lay its eggs. A bed that provides no such shelter supports a far smaller resident population. This same understanding of the relationship between ecological structure and pest behavior underlies the agamo method, the traditional Japanese rice farming practice of releasing ducks into rice paddies to eat the insects, snails, and weeds that would otherwise damage the crop. The ducks do not apply a treatment, they become part of the system. Their presence changes the conditions of the paddy permanently, rather than temporarily. The principle is identical to what the kitchen garden approach described here achieves at a smaller scale. You are not reacting to pests after they arrive. You are building a garden that does not produce them in damaging numbers in the first place. What to do this weekend? The practical sequence is simple and costs under $30 to establish. Start with the soil surface. Buy rice bran from an Asian grocery store. Apply it in a band of roughly 3 inches around the perimeter of every bed you want to protect, and as a light dressing across bare soil between plants. Refresh it after heavy rain. 10 minutes per bed, and a single bag covers a full season. Then plant the border. Put shiso in any bed where you grow leafy vegetables. It can be harvested as you cook through the summer, so it earns its space twice. Plant chrysanthemums along the outer margin of the garden as a perimeter barrier. Both are available as seeds or transplants at any nursery. Then look at the structure of your beds. If your plants are crowded, thin them. If dead plant material is sitting on the surface, clear. If water pools after rain and stays for hours, address the drainage. None of this requires purchasing anything. It requires looking at the garden as a system and removing the conditions that serve the pest rather than the plant. The result is not a garden where slugs have been killed. It is a garden where the conditions that would allow them to build to damaging numbers have been quietly removed. The distinction matters because a garden from which pests have been poisoned needs continuous poisoning to stay that way. A garden whose conditions have been changed stays changed. That is what 1,000 years of Japanese kitchen gardening learned, and it turns out it takes a weekend to apply it.